I remember the exact weight of that silence, how it used to sit on my chest like something alive, something breathing with me, but never letting me breathe freely. And I kept telling myself that maybe this was the right way to love you, from a distance, from a place where I wouldn't disturb your world, where my feelings wouldn't complicate the beauty of what we already had. Because sometimes you convince yourself that restraint is a form of care, that holding back is noble, that protecting someone means never letting them see how deeply they've changed you. But the truth is, every time I looked at you, every quiet moment we shared, every laugh that lingered just a second longer than it should have, it felt like something inside me was asking to be heard, like a voice I kept burying under logic and fear. And I told myself stories about timing, about uncertainty, about how maybe this wasn't the right moment, or maybe I wasn't the right person, but none of those stories ever felt as real as the way my heart reacted to you, the way everything else in the world seemed to slow down when you were near. And I think that's when I started to realize that love doesn't always arrive loudly. It doesn't always crash into your life with certainty and clarity. Sometimes it grows quietly, patiently, almost invisibly, until one day you wake up and realize it's been there all along, shaping your thoughts, your choices, your silences. And that's what scared me the most, not the feeling itself, but how real it was, how it refused to fade no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, how it stayed with me even in moments when I convinced myself I had moved past it, because deep down, I knew I hadn't. I was just better at pretending, better at smiling through conversations that meant more to me than they should have, better at walking away when all I wanted was to stay. And I think that's the part no one really talks about, the quiet endurance of loving someone without telling them, the way it reshapes your inner world, the way it teaches you patience and pain at the same time. Because you start living in two realities, the one you show and the one you feel. And for a long time, I thought I could keep doing that. I thought I could carry this truth without it ever needing to be spoken. But the thing about truth, real truth, is that it doesn't stay hidden forever. It finds its way to the surface. In the way you look at someone, in the pauses between your words, in the things you almost say but stop yourself from saying, and eventually, those almost become too heavy, too frequent, too impossible to ignore. And that's where I found myself, standing at the edge of something honest, something irreversible, realizing that if I didn't speak now, I might lose more than just a chance. I might lose the part of myself that believes in taking risks for something real. And I've lost enough in my life to know that regret has a way of lingering far longer than rejection ever could. So I started asking myself a different question. Not, what if this changes everything? But what if this is the very thing that was meant to change everything? And that shift, as small as it sounds, felt like the beginning of something. Like the moment you stop running from your own feelings and start walking toward them instead, even if the path is uncertain, even if you don't know where it leads. Because there's a kind of peace and honesty that you can't find anywhere else, a kind of freedom in finally saying what's been living inside you for so long. And I think, in my own way, I was ready for that, ready to let go of the safety of silence and step into something more real, more vulnerable, more human, because loving you in secret taught me a lot. But it also showed me that some truths aren't meant to be carried alone. Some feelings deserve to be shared, not because you expect something in return, but because they're real, and being real is the only thing that ever truly matters. I won't pretend that everything changed the moment I admitted the truth to myself, because it didn't. If anything, that's when things became even more complicated, even more real, like stepping out of a quiet, dimly lit room into the open where nothing can be hidden anymore, not even from your own thoughts. I started noticing how every memory of you carried a different weight now, how the smallest details began to feel significant, like the way your voice softened when you spoke about things you cared about, or how your eyes seemed to hold entire stories I was never quite brave enough to ask about. And it made me realize that love isn't just about the big, dramatic moments people talk about. It's built from these quiet observations, these fragments of presence that slowly become something irreplaceable, something you can't simply walk away from without feeling like you're leaving a part of yourself behind. And I remember asking myself over and over again if I was ready for what this meant, because loving someone openly, honestly, without filters, it requires a kind of courage that doesn't come easily, at least not to me. Not after everything life has already taken and taught me. Because when you've known loss, when you've felt things slip through your hands no matter how tightly you held on, you start to become careful, maybe even guarded, convincing yourself that distance is a form of protection, that if you don't fully step in, you won't have to fully feel the impact if things fall apart. But the truth I kept running into was simple and relentless. I was already in it, already feeling it, already carrying you in ways I couldn't undo. And pretending otherwise wasn't protecting me. It was only delaying something inevitable. There's a moment, I think, when you realize that fear doesn't disappear, it just becomes something you have to walk alongside. And for me, that moment came quietly, not in some grand realization, but in the stillness of ordinary time, when I caught myself smiling at a memory of you for no reason at all. And instead of pushing it away, I let it stay. I let it exist without questioning it, without trying to control it. And in that small act of acceptance, something shifted, something settled inside me like a truth I could finally stand on. I began to understand that love isn't about certainty. It's not about guarantees or perfect timing. It's about presence, about choosing to be honest even when the outcome is unclear, and maybe that's what I had been avoiding all along. Not the feeling itself, but the uncertainty that comes with expressing it. The vulnerability of putting something so real into the world without knowing how it will be received. Because once it's spoken, you can't take it back. It exists between you and the other person in a way that changes everything, even if nothing outwardly changes at all. And I kept thinking about that, about how fragile and powerful words can be, how they can build something or break something, how they can bring two people closer or create a distance that wasn't there before. And I realized that what mattered most wasn't controlling the outcome. It was honoring the truth. Because there's a kind of quiet regret that comes from not saying what you feel, a kind of lingering question that stays with you. What if I had just been honest? What if I had taken that step? What if I had trusted the feeling instead of doubting it? And I didn't want to carry those questions anymore. I didn't want to look back on this and wonder what could have been. Because some connections don't come into your life by accident. They arrive with a kind of purpose, even if you don't understand it right away. And I couldn't ignore the way you had changed me. The way knowing you had shifted something in how I saw the world, how I saw myself. And that kind of impact doesn't just fade quietly into the background. It asks to be acknowledged, to be respected, to be given a voice. So I started to prepare myself, not in the sense of rehearsing words or planning some perfect moment, but in the deeper sense of becoming ready to stand in my own truth, to accept whatever comes with it, whether it's something beautiful or something difficult. Because at the end of the day, love isn't measured by how safe it is, it's measured by how real it is. And what I felt for you was real in a way that I couldn't deny anymore. A way that didn't need permission or validation to exist. It simply was steady and undeniable, like something that had always been there waiting for me to finally see it clearly. And I think that's where I found a kind of calm I hadn't expected, not because I knew what would happen next, but because I had stopped running from it. I had stopped trying to minimize it or explain it away. I had allowed it to be exactly what it was, nothing more and nothing less. And in doing that, I felt a kind of clarity that had been missing for so long. Like everything inside me had finally aligned with something honest, something true. And even though the path ahead was still uncertain, even though there were still questions I didn't have answers to, I knew one thing with a certainty I couldn't ignore anymore. I couldn't go back to silence. I couldn't return to pretending that this was something small or temporary. Because it wasn't. It had grown into something that deserved to be seen, to be spoken, to be shared, and whether that would change everything or change nothing at all, I was finally ready to find out. Because some truths, once you recognize them, don't let you stay the same. They move you forward whether you're ready or not. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what this was meant to do. I wish I could tell you that the moment I decided to finally speak my truth, everything inside me became steady and certain, but that wouldn't be honest. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that honesty doesn't just belong in the words we say to others. It has to exist within ourselves first, in the quiet places where doubt still lingers and fear still tries to find its way back in. Because even as I stood there, closer than ever to turning everything I felt into something spoken, I could feel the weight of every possible outcome pressing against my thoughts, like standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. knowing that one step forward could change the shape of everything that comes after. And I think that's the part people rarely talk about when it comes to love. The stillness before the truth, the moment where time feels stretched thin between what is and what could be, where your heart is asking you to be brave, but your mind is listing every reason to stay silent just a little longer. And I listened to both. I let them exist without forcing one to win over the other, because I realized that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward even when fear is present, even when it's loud and persistent, even when it reminds you of every time things didn't go the way you hoped they would. And I've had my share of those moments. Times when life didn't just disappoint me, it reshaped me, taught me how fragile things can be, how quickly something meaningful can slip away. And for a long time, I think I carried that awareness like a shield, something that kept me from fully stepping into anything that mattered too much. Because if you don't go all the way in, you don't have to feel all the way when it's gone. Or at least that's what I used to believe. But standing there, with everything I felt for you becoming impossible to ignore, I started to see that holding back doesn't actually protect you. It just keeps you from experiencing something fully. And maybe that's a different kind of loss. One that's quieter but just as real, because you end up living in the space of almost, of what could have been, of words left unsaid and moments that never had the chance to become something more. And I didn't want that anymore. Not with you. Not with something that had already proven itself to be more than just a passing feeling. I began to replay the moments that brought me here, not as a way to hold on to the past, but as a way to understand how deeply this had taken root in me. How something that started so quietly had grown into something that now felt essential, like it had become part of how I moved through the world, part of how I saw things. And I realized that love doesn't always announce itself when it arrives. Sometimes it reveals itself in retrospect, in the way you start connecting the dots and seeing that what you thought were small, insignificant moments were actually building something meaningful all along. And thinking about that gave me a kind of strength I hadn't expected, because it reminded me that this wasn't something sudden or impulsive. It wasn't a fleeting emotion that might disappear if I waited long enough. It was something that had endured time, distance, doubt, and still remained, still felt just as real as it did in the beginning. Maybe even more so now that I had allowed myself to fully acknowledge it. And I started to understand that the real risk wasn't in speaking the truth, it was in continuing to hide from it, in denying something that had already proven its place in my life. Because no matter how much I tried to keep it contained, it kept finding ways to show itself. In the way I thought about you when I didn't mean to, in the way certain songs or places, or even quiet moments would bring you to mind without warning. And it made me realize that some connections don't ask for permission to exist, they just do. And the only choice you really have is whether you're going to honor them or ignore them. And I had spent enough time ignoring, enough time convincing myself that maybe this would pass, that maybe I could outwait it, outthink it. But standing there now, closer than ever to the truth, I knew that wasn't an option anymore. Because the longer I stayed silent, the more it felt like I was betraying something important, not just what I felt for you, but something within myself that believed in honesty, that believed in taking the risk even when the outcome is uncertain. And I won't say I wasn't afraid of what might happen next, because I was. I still am in a way, because once you open your heart like that, once you put something so real into the world, you're no longer in control of how it will be received. You're trusting someone else with something that matters deeply to you. And that kind of trust isn't easy. It requires you to let go of the need for certainty, to accept that you might not get the answer you're hoping for, that things might not unfold the way you imagine they will. But at the same time, there's something incredibly grounding about that, something that brings you back to what really matters. Because when you strip away all the what-ifs and the imagined outcomes, what you're left with is the truth itself, simple and unfiltered. And for me, that truth was you, what I felt for you. The way you had become a constant in my thoughts and in my life in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. And I think that's when I realized that this wasn't just about telling you how I felt. It was about choosing to live in alignment with that feeling, to stop holding back out of fear and start moving forward with honesty, even if it meant stepping into something uncertain, because uncertainty is part of anything real, anything meaningful. And if I was going to take this step, I wanted to do it fully, without hesitation, without trying to protect myself by leaving something unsaid, because that would only bring me back to where I started, back to that place of silence that never really felt right. So I took a moment, not to gather the perfect words, but to steady myself in the truth of what I was about to do, to remind myself why this mattered, why you mattered, why this feeling was worth the risk, and I let go of the need to control what happens next, because I understood that some things aren't meant to be controlled, they're meant to be experienced, to be lived through honestly. And whatever comes after that, whatever response, whatever change, it's something I'll face when it comes, because at least then I'll know that I didn't let fear make the decision for me, that I didn't let this moment pass without giving it the chance it deserved. And in that realization, there was a kind of quiet strength, not loud or dramatic, but steady and real, like something settling into place within me, something that said, this is the moment. This is where you stop holding back and finally let yourself be seen, not perfectly, not without fear, but honestly, and sometimes that's more than enough. And so, standing there with the weight of everything I had kept inside finally pressing against the edges of my voice, I realized that speaking this truth wasn't just about telling you that I loved you. It was about acknowledging every moment, every feeling, every quiet thought that had led me here, the endless chain of small, often unnoticed experiences that had built this connection into something undeniable. I thought about the times I had watched you laugh from across the room, the way your eyes lit up in ways I wanted to remember forever, and how I had convinced myself that keeping my distance was the kindest thing I could do, when really, it had been an act of fear disguised as care, a way to avoid exposing the raw parts of me that only you had ever managed to reach. I thought about the nights I spent replaying our conversations in my mind, analyzing every word, every pause, every fleeting smile, wondering if I had missed a sign, if there had been a moment when I could have acted differently, and yet knowing that all of those moments, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, were shaping something real inside me, a persistent, undeniable sense that this was more than admiration, more than friendship, more than fleeting infatuation. It was something that had grown quietly, organically, until it could no longer be contained, until the very act of silence felt like a betrayal, not just to you, but to myself, to the part of me that knew what love required, that knew that real connection could not survive in shadows. And so I prepared myself, in the only way I knew how, by letting myself feel everything fully, without apology, without hesitation, without pretending that my heart wasn't already entirely invested. I thought about the vulnerability of confessing, about the risk of rejection, about the possibility that things could change irreversibly. And yet I realized that the real danger had always been staying silent, continuing to hide behind words unspoken, behind emotions locked away in the quiet corners of my mind. And in that realization, I understood that love isn't measured by certainty or guarantees. It's measured by courage, the courage to expose your truth, to let someone see you exactly as you are, even when it scares you to your core, even when you can't predict the outcome. Because what matters is authenticity, what matters is honesty, and what matters is refusing to let fear dictate the path of something that already feels essential to your existence. I started to see our moments together not as isolated events, but as a tapestry of experiences that had led me here, each one weaving a deeper understanding, each one a step toward this inevitable truth. And I realized that all those conversations, all those laughs, all those silent glances carried a significance I had tried to ignore, but could no longer deny. They had shaped my heart, trained it to recognize that some feelings demand to be acknowledged, that some connections cannot remain unspoken without diminishing something vital inside you. And so, in that quiet, tremulous awareness, I made a choice. I chose to let my heart lead, to speak before the weight of unexpressed emotion became unbearable, to embrace the uncertainty and risk, knowing that anything less would be a betrayal of not just my feelings for you, but of the integrity of the love itself, which requires honesty above all else, a transparency that cannot coexist with pretense or fear. I imagine the words leaving my lips. Imagine the moment they reached you. Imagine the vulnerability that would stretch across the space between us. And I realized that even in the possibility of rejection, even in the possibility of misunderstanding, There was a profound beauty in simply exposing the truth, in allowing my heart to be seen in its entirety, because love, in its truest form, cannot survive hidden, cannot thrive in silence. And the act of confessing is itself a sacred gesture, a testament to the depth of feeling that has persisted regardless of circumstance, timing, or fear. And as I took that metaphorical step toward you, I felt the layers of doubt and hesitation begin to peel away, revealing a clarity I hadn't felt in years, a sense of alignment between what I felt and what I was ready to express, a resonance between the truth within me and the possibility of sharing it with someone who mattered more than words could ever fully capture. And I knew, in the deepest part of myself, that this act of honesty was more than just a confession. It was a declaration of what it means to be human, to love without reservation, to face the vulnerability inherent in opening your heart, and to do so knowing that the outcome is unknown, but the integrity of the feeling itself is undeniable. And so I prepared, not for perfection, not for control, but for truth, for the trembling, messy, overwhelming reality of love that demands to be expressed, the kind of love that waits for no one's convenience, that refuses to be silenced, that insists on being recognized. And in that readiness, I found not fear, not hesitation, but a strange and exhilarating strength, because at last, I was ready to let the truth of my heart exist outside of me, to step into the full, terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of loving openly and honestly. And then came the moment when all the preparation, all the quiet rehearsals in my mind, all the weight of years spent holding back, converged into something almost tangible, something I could feel in my chest, in my throat, in the trembling of my hands as I considered finally letting it all out. I realized that speaking this truth wasn't just a singular act. It was the culmination of every small choice, every silent moment of longing, every time I had held my tongue, every time I had resisted. The urge to step closer, because all of those moments had taught me, shaped me, prepared me to understand what it truly meant to love someone, not as a fleeting passion, not as a convenient infatuation, but as a sustained, raw, unflinching devotion that demands honesty, even at the cost of vulnerability, even at the risk of heartbreak, even when the outcome is completely unknown. I thought about the nights I lay awake replaying our interactions, analyzing the nuances of your smile, the way your laughter seemed to fill the spaces around us, the brief glances that lasted just a heartbeat too long to be coincidence. And I realized that every detail, every memory, had been teaching me the same lesson, that love cannot be contained, that it will find its way to the surface, and that the courage to speak it aloud is not just an option. It is a necessity if it is to survive in its purest form. And as I faced the prospect of revealing everything, I felt the vulnerability that comes with letting another person into the core of your being, the trembling knowledge that someone else now holds a piece of your heart that cannot be reclaimed once exposed. And yet, beneath that fear, there was a quiet certainty, a recognition that the act of sharing my truth was more important than the outcome itself, that the authenticity of my feelings mattered more than the response they might provoke, and that by finally stepping into honesty, I was honoring both you and myself in a way I hadn't dared to before. I considered the countless what-ifs that could have paralyzed me. What if you didn't feel the same? What if the dynamic we had built shifted irrevocably? What if my timing was all wrong? But I realized that love, in its truest form, does not wait for perfect circumstances. It does not require guarantees. It does not ask permission to exist. It simply is, and the only way to honor it is to let it be known, to allow it to take its natural course, to risk everything for the possibility of connection, because the alternative, continued silence, continued restraint, would have been a betrayal of the depth and sincerity of what I felt, and that, more than anything, I could not accept. I began to see that this confession was not only about my feelings for you, but about the way life teaches us to engage with love, to embrace it fully, to acknowledge that the vulnerability inherent in opening one's heart is both terrifying and exhilarating, that the act of risking rejection is inseparable from the act of truly loving, and that the most meaningful relationships we experience are often the ones that demand the most of us, that ask us to rise above our fears, that require us to Show up completely, with nothing hidden, with nothing withheld, because that is the only way to honor the connection for what it really is. And so, as I imagined speaking to you, as I imagined the moment when words finally bridged the space between us, I felt a profound mixture of fear, anticipation, hope, and relief, all tangled together in a way that made my chest ache and my pulse race. Because love is never simple, it is never predictable, it is never something you can control entirely, and yet, it is the most honest, transformative force we experience, shaping our choices, our perspectives, and the way we see ourselves and each other. And I knew that this moment, the act of revealing my heart, was both inevitable and essential, a threshold I had to cross if I was ever to live fully, authentically, and without regret. I thought about the countless times I had avoided this, the innumerable ways I had convinced myself that restraint was the better option, that silence was safer, that the risk outweighed the reward. And yet, the truth had remained stubbornly present, quietly asserting itself in every smile, every shared glance, every fleeting connection that could not be ignored. And in finally acknowledging it, I was freeing not only my own heart, but inviting the possibility of something deeper, something more real, something that had the power to redefine everything we had shared. And in that acceptance, I felt the tremors of courage coursing through me, a readiness to let my words and my emotions exist in the world exactly as they were, unpolished, unguarded, completely human. Because that is the essence of love, the willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to risk, the willingness to speak what has been kept silent for far too long, and to do so not because I expect a particular response, but because it is the only way to honor what is true inside me, to honor the connection we share, to honor the love that has grown in the quiet spaces between us, patiently waiting for this moment to arrive. And so, I stood there, heart in hand, aware of every tremor of doubt, every flicker of hope, every tiny, persistent whisper that had guided me to this point. And I realized that this was the culmination of a journey I had been on longer than I had fully acknowledged, a journey of self-discovery, of courage, of understanding that love is not something you can measure or contain. It is something you experience fully or not at all. And in choosing to speak, I was stepping into the fullness of that experience, embracing the uncertainty, the vulnerability, the raw, unfiltered truth of what I feel, and knowing that, regardless of the outcome, I had honored my heart, I had honored you, and I had honored the undeniable power of love to transform, to challenge, and to illuminate every part of our lives in ways we could never have anticipated.